Oh wow, look at the action leaping off the page here. Hey there, fellow time travelers and comic book aficionados. If you're not reading your comic books in 3D, you're not trying hard enough. There was a time in comic book history, especially around the early 1950s, where we start to see a lot of 3D comics. I want to take you through a timeline from the 50s even to up to present to show you a sampling of comic books that feature the 3D glasses in 3D. In 1548, Da Vinci created stereoscopic figures that, when looking at them, would bring two images together to create a 3D effect. One typically utilized the color red and the other blue, and by closely matching those lines and contours right next to each other, it creates a 3D effect that we know from watching movies and, of course, reading comic books. When we bring those two images together, they create an anaglyph, spelled right there. And that is the image that our brain perceives. So some of us remember watching Captain America in 3D or the movie Avatar, which now has a sequel, and they were in 3D. There was a thrill and something extra that the theater could offer for the viewer and for entertainment. Experimenting with 3D films began in the early 1920s in Los Angeles, where short films, typically done in black and white, featured the red and blue contours and lines to create that 3D effect. But it wasn't until 1952, with a large-scale film in color called Buona Devil, featuring a large lion and the lions of Gulu, thrilled and entertained the audiences. As moviegoers watched with their 3D spectacles right here, they saw the lion pouncing onto them from the screen. It was quite an amazement. So that craze began 3D movies, one of which included robots stepping over skyscrapers and streets. Of course, the giant lizard menacing the shores of coasts, and the action continued, even including space. So with the movies and eventually the comic books, it's a neat subject to explore, and for some reason has kind of leveled off in what we see now in comic books. And Polaroid, known for making their famous cameras, also made 3D glasses back in the 1950s to the tune of 5 million or more. And that was a staggering number. A lot of the movie houses and the staff never liked to pick up all the glasses and sweep them away at the end of every showing. And that's where we see the 3D glasses come into play. Wow, wearing these can make you a little dizzy. Let's switch back to the regular glasses so I can see you clearly and start the show. Using my time machine, I was able to retrieve a few books, and the first one I want to show you is from Harvey Comics, and it's dedicated to the 3D genre, and it's called True 3D. And this issue here was published in February of 1954, just a couple years after the movie debut of 3D effects in the theaters. So here we actually can take this home and read it and not have to pay a ticket, and we could read it again and again. So Harvey Comics introduced a variety of stories. In this book, there are different ones that include a war story, as we could see on the cover here, the paratrooper jumping, as well as a tale about a whale and a crop duster, all of which makes use of neat 3D effects. And inside the book, you'll find these glasses that can be perforated and torn with the red and the blue. But in this case, it looks a little bit more green, and you can see the stub right inside here. So these books were neat because once you had the glasses, you can hold them by your eyes. These didn't have the ones to go over the ear, and just view the 3D effect. This is right neat right away, the splash page with different dynamic and daring. Looks like Captain 3D. And some of those 3D characters like Jungle Joe or Captain 3D was provided by 3 Dimensions Comics. This happens to be Harvey, so we're starting to see more players, if you will, in the game. And even though the pages are faded, you could still see the blue and the red that makes that stereoscopic image and the anaglyph that our eyes perceive. And looking at the cover right here, it's by Howard Nostrand. The yellow in the background and the 3D lettering, and also that's kind of catchy for back in the day to grab the viewer for 3D. So let's look at the pages inside the book. One will note that the borders of the pages show leaves or smoke or flames going out of bounds, and that, when you put on your 3D glasses, makes them look all the more real and all the more 3D. One of the main features of this book is the centerfold that features Pearl Harbor, and you can see the propeller planes flying away and also the sunk battleship. It was quite a scene, but it was captured in this issue, number 2 of True 3D, as you can see the pages right there. So looking at scenery, historical, war, genre, large whales, crop dusters, you name it, it makes for interesting 3D stories with their 3D effect. Just want to hold up this one right here. It is a little faded, but you can see where, if you look with the red and the blue, that's where the whale is breaking the mast of the ship, and we see the waves in the water. So it's kind of a fun thing to see. Also on the back, we see Harvey Delights right here, and millions of books, as they say. Another neat note about the Harvey books, on the first inside page, they give some directions on how to read the comic book and also introduce the 3D glasses. The left eye typically had the red color and the right eye typically the blue or the green, and that's how you enjoyed 3D. And a letter from the editor as well, and it was just a neat way to get into that. So if you're watching this video and you're able to watch it on your TV, you can probably enlarge it and put on your 3D glasses so you can follow along and see some of the effects. It might be a little blurry, but it's worth a shot as we enjoy 3D books. And for our next 3D book, it's none other than Superman, in this comic right here featuring the 3D effect, and it was published by 3 Dimensions Comics in November of 1953. So that's considered the golden age of 3D and 3D comics. And this happens to be a replica, a facsimile that came out in 1997 by DC. They actually published it. But back then, 3 Dimensions had the rights and licenses to portray Superman, as well as Jungle Joe, Captain 3D, and a series of characters using 3D glasses to watch. So here we have this beautiful cover I want to show you right there. I like the DC logo, 3-dimension adventures, and Superman. And it includes a few stories and some reprints where Lex Luthor tries to steal the sun out of the sky and use it for evil. So looking at the viewer, you can take a view of some of those pages, and you'll find that it is black and white, so there's no color, which kind of makes it a different reading experience. But with the glasses, you can see a little bit more. I personally like the splash pages. They're kind of neat to stare at. Sometimes looking panel by panel can be a little strained on the eye, but just kind of focusing on one big panel is a lot of fun for me. And as you can see there with space and projectiles. I also like it when we find our hero on top of the Empire State Building and we have that bird's eye view. That's pretty neat as well. And the colors here are just red and blue, as we saw. But there's one in particular that was a throwback to Superman-ish in 1948. And that's right here. You can see his strength. I did a video about heroic strength and featured Carl Swan's debut in the one page right here. And it's interesting to know Lois was in the original, but now it was redrawn with a different character and the mobster who's ordering Superman to do his bidding. So we have a little bit of a reprint in this book here, and Carl Schwan. But again, it's kind of neat to see that. The back cover is always great. You can see the sign there, Superman action scenes in 3D. There's a story featuring a robot, the rocket, baseball. That's 1950s. That was the time with Mickey Mantle and a lot of great heroes in baseball then. And also, unfortunately, wars taking place at the end of World War II, the Korean War going on as well. So this is a neat book reprinted from the 1953. With that issue, they also included a copy of a modern book, and it's just the cover. The inside pages are color, but it's just another 3D effect with Superman red and blue. Figured I'd show you that because it came together wrapped in the poly bag with the 3 Dimensions reprint Superman. And I'm excited to show you this next book. It's a large oversized comic featuring Batman that came out in 1966. That's also the debut of the acclaimed TV series with Adam West. And of course, that Corgi Batmobile that we know and love. And we have here a 3-dimension 3D Batman. So pretty worn copy, but happy to show you and happy to take you through the pages here, as this was made in 1966. And opening up the comic, we're greeted by Batman and Robin fighting off the Penguin and all these birds right here. So putting on your glasses, it's a kind of a neat thing to see, that 3D effect and planning the depth. And it's not only Batman featured in the book, there's also Tommy Tomorrow right over here. And just kind of getting that closer to you, as well as another Batman story featuring a gigantic robot. And I'm always a fan for these big robot introductions. And look at the people and the cars below. Couple robots, the robot robbers right there. So it's neat to see from the Penguin to the robbers and Tommy Tomorrow, the interesting stories. So looking right here, you can flip through and just see some of the artwork. And it's always fun to see the bricks flying or the beams, the laser blasts, and the debris all over it. That's what makes the comic fun. The smaller panels are a little hard for me to read and see, but the bigger ones really make for some neat glory. So taking a look there, you can see how the artist portrayed. So these are reprinted, but adding the blue and the red to make it more 3D. So I want to show you also the inside posters that are within the book, and they are a beauty with Batman right there in front of the control panels, and that's a still from the movie, the black and white, or rather the TV series. And then on the back page, there's another one featuring the Batmobile right over there, which is a Ford Lincoln Futura, a concept design that came out in 1955 that makes up this Batmobile, also known as a Corgi Batmobile, but it was based on a concept that was being produced, so Ford Lincoln Futura. There you have Batman and Robin close together, and I always like those two windshields on top. So we have Batman in 3D, as I get it right, side up, and you see the Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler as well, and also the Bam Kapow that we know from the series. So Batman. So looking at our timeline, we saw 1953, 1954, we just saw 1966. It was not until later in the 80s that we see a resurgence of 3D comic books, and they were brought to us by a couple different publishers, one of which was Eclipse Comics, and in 1986 we start to see a couple more titles. So we'll take a look at these individually, starting with Tor and Joe Kubert artwork. Tor 3D issue number 1 was published in July of 1986. And Joe Kubert, whom we know from DC Comics, especially the war genres and involved with a lot of the characters there, leaped over to Eclipse Comics. Eclipse was founded in 1977, and they gave the artistic rights and licenses to the artist, to whatever they created. Much like Pacific Comics, that went out of business just years before. And it, like no other, Joe Kubert is trying to find a name for himself here, creating Tor, which can arguably be a Tarzan knockoff, but it includes giant dinosaurs and creatures that roamed the earth 1 million years ago, with Tor, as we see on the title there, trying to survive and thrive in this landscape. And looking at the splash page, we see a giant T-Rex dinosaur there, and it truly makes use of the 3D. You can guess what's going to happen next. You're going to see a lot of teeth, a lot of rocks flying, a lot of pebbles going every which way, including stegosauruses and triceratops and ancient animals. Looking here, you can see some of the red and blue overlay and the black contrast. You'll notice still no color, as it does affect the 3D. Tor has to befriend a few of the dinosaurs to help him get through the wild and raw earth, and it's more of an artistic pictorial delight. The story, in my opinion, is a little flat, but the 3D effect is what makes it worthwhile and a part of history. These books can be found real cheap, as it's just a fad in the 80s where the 3D makes a resurgence. So if you like prehistoric comics, Tarzan and Tor, that book is for you. But if you like horror and suspense and mystery, then you'll like Mr. Mystery's High Octane Horror, issue number 1, with some reprints of some great eerie tales. And this is also in 3D. So imagine monster claws and whiskers and large teeth coming at you in this book here. I want to take a moment to show you the 3D glasses that come with it, tucked away in the book. You can see the logo as well, and they open up to create a full pair of glasses. These are 2 in total, and they look more like this afterwards. So you can see the how it's constructed. You kind of put them on, and you can enjoy your book that way. So in this book, Mr. Mystery's 3D High Octane Horror, issue number 1, that's a mouthful. It features some reprints, including Bob Powell's artwork, and specifically, it reproduces This Magazine is Haunted, issue number 4, from April of 1952. And looking at the viewer here, you can see some of the pages, the scary characters, and also the helpless human people walking through and trying to make amends of what they see. So it has a very creepy aura and vibe to it, but with the 3D, you can see how it skips the margins and projectiles of smoke and lingering haze is all around. So it makes for a fun book. Also, Joe Kubert, who we just talked about, also has a story in the middle of this book, as well as a couple other reprints. It's only a one-shot, so there weren't many follow-ups to this book, but it's pretty neat. The main story is called The Blind, the Doomed, and the Dead, and the splash page is pretty cool to look at as well. You see a top hat, a skull, all which are kind of archetypes of horror, and the black and white. So still no color, but nonetheless, you have the figures and everything there. So that is a neat book, and just pretty cool designs in the front. And in the back we have the logo of Eclipse. And moving from Eclipse Comics, we get to another publishing company that also debuted in 1986 that featured 3D comics, and that's Blackthorne Publications. And a couple examples are right here. They're noted for reprinting the comic books, or comic strips rather, in the newspapers in book form, and also acquired the licenses to the Transformers and also Star Wars, among other titles. So how did Blackthorne and Eclipse come to be? A year earlier, in 1985, Pacific Comics declared bankruptcy, and they were a company that Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko did a little work for it to have their own creative license and recognition and royalties come to them. But since that went defunct, we start to see Blackthorne and taking the reins for that, and also Eclipse. So it's interesting that transition in the mid-80s from company to company. Blackthorne only existed from 1986 to 1989 and received praise for publishing the newspaper comics once again for readers to enjoy. And Dick Tracy is the first book in the series that kind of features some of that here. A compilation of the news strips are featured and even some re-clipping and repatterning of the strip is seen here. So looking at the viewer, you can see some of that older artwork by Chester Gould as he worked in the Chicago Tribune creating this series. And that's exactly what it is. These are reprints from back in the day, now in the year 86. And you can see some of the survivor stories here with the island. He's stationed in Cuba. He has to find his way back to the States. And it's just some older stories. It doesn't feature his trench coat or the famous Dick Tracy wristwatch, but it's an earlier Dick Tracy episode. This is the fourth book in the series. The very first one was Sheena, issue number 1, which was originally slated for Pacific Comics, but because they went bankrupt, it didn't happen. These type panels are characteristic of how they appeared in the newspaper, all symmetrical squares. So when you're enjoying 3D, you kind of want to see outside the frame, but it's kind of a lackluster 3D effect. It wasn't as enjoyable as the other 3D books because you didn't have the explosion of objects and projectiles. It was just literally a reprint and slapped over with 3D effect. It is worth noting the back cover. You can see the different books, including Sheena and a couple other ones there with 3D on there. In December of 1987, a 3D book that did come out by Blackthorne that was a lot of fun was Star Wars, including this cover, which is a pretty nice one there, and of course the 3D to make it official. And we have Han Solo smacking a alien enemy in front there, and Chewbacca, what looks like Luke Skywalker as well. But it's pretty neat to see the stars in the galaxy and the Millennium Falcon trying to outrun these crafts right there. So it's pretty neat to see Star Wars in full form there in the splash page. And by wearing the 3D glasses, it makes it pop and come to life. Looking at the viewer, you could see even more of the Star Wars action there, page by page, as they're inside the spacecraft or even outside, flying in their respective vehicles. So pretty neat to see there. Not a lot of Princess Leia, not too much Chewbacca, but a lot of Han Solo in this story here. And just neat to see 3D. So if you're watching the movie that came out around Christmas time at that time, you can go to your local greeting card store where they're very popular, or Walgreens or pharmacy and grocery store, and that's where they had these 3D comics. What I also like is the back cover of this, and this is a Transformers, so they also are advertising a 3D Transformers, an issue that I don't have. You'll note back even in the 80s they had that barcode, and it was also in the 70s, but like Night Tiger Comics said, it kind of distracts the artwork on the front and it makes for a gaudy cover, but it's kind of somewhat annoying to see barcodes. But anyway, the back cover, which Captain Strangelove always liked, is a really neat one there. So now jumping from 1986, we're going to go to 1999, where we see an interesting book by the United States Postal Service looking at the decades one at a time. And this time it was the 50s. As you can see in the corner here, this book includes 1950 to 1959 and its superheroes stamp album. And here we have the drive-in theater and Wonder Woman and Superman enjoying a movie, while also this young fellow looking at 3D comic books. And you can also see the 3D glasses. What's interesting to note that this issue right here of Superhero Stamp Album came with this 3D glasses right there, a little tab that you can hold, and you can look through the book. There are a couple stamps that are in 3D. A lot of the book is not 3D drawn, but it goes step by step and year by year through the 50s. So this is one issue out of a few featuring the decades in American history, and it starts with the Cold War in Korea, and the artwork was Superman and the missile blast. And then turning the page, it goes to the 51 national pennant race with a shot heard around the world in baseball. So that's kind of neat to see there, as you have the Dodgers and the New York Yankees, and also TV's biggest hits, including I Love Lucy, which is pretty neat, when she's in Italy and making wine, vitamins, and Desi Arnaz as well. The movies go 3D, just appropriate for our 3D show there. And this is some information of the Bona Devil movie and the lion popping out. And you can see the people wearing the 3D glasses. So it's pretty neat to see the cinema utilizing 3D. So that's a cool thing to see, and that's where you use your 3D glasses to see right there those stamps that are in the corner, including this one taken from the Batman book that we saw from 1966. That's the robot story from the Three Dimensions Batman book. So that's pretty cool. See Plastic Man looking as well. So every page is something new. Desegregation, 1950s with Batman, and social acceptance and such. World Series rivals is the next page right there. So that is fun. So every couple of pages is something new, including in the 50s, the polio vaccine and what that meant. And Batman and Robin featured in that. The next page includes Rocky Marciano, that's the famous boxer. So just some highlighted events. Also rock and roll in the 1950s. How can we not pass up the 1950s without rock and roll? And you can note the little stamp. There's Elvis right there. So the stamps are on each story, including tail fins, the cars that we know from back in the day, the Chevys and Impalas, and that's pretty cool. So more some history for the young reader, and also a homage to the drive-through. I know the captain always likes those little short movies at halftime or during the intermission, and there we have the movie, not a 3D one, but a drive-through movie. So I just wanted to show you that little book there, The Explorers, and from the United States Postal Service. So the golden age of 3D comics was in the 1950s, and then we saw a little resurgence in the 80s, and just that last tribute from the end of the 90s right there. But in the year 2011 and also 2020, we see a couple more comic books featuring 3D, and that includes the Zen Intergalactic Master, and also a homage to Todd McFarlane, issue number 300 in the Superman Venom book. So interesting to note that Zen Intergalactic Ninja came out around the same time of the Ninja Turtles in the late 80s. 1987, this character debut. He's a master of OM, and he goes through space fighting evil and anybody that wants to disrupt nature and the natural balance of the earth. His superpowers include telepathy, and he also is able to hover in the air through meditation, aside from fantastic martial arts skills. It's kind of like reminiscent to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but he's a solo character equipped with a bow staff and ready to knock somebody out. So the artwork on the inside is right here. The stories are created by Steve Stern, who I had the opportunity to meet at a convention and sign the book. And his property was actually picked up by Archie Comics, where he had a series run. And you can see here the characters, the alien mystique about it. and the way he handles himself and also regenerates after battle. You can see here on the cover the autograph of Steve Stern. He's the author, the storyteller of the book, and Dan Cote with the artwork. And it also spanned the Archie's series that was mentioned. And my introduction actually came with the video game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. When I first looked at it, it kind of reminded me of the Ninja Turtles, maybe a side character, an alien from there, or even the Toxic Avengers that was popular, or the Swamp Thing. So it's all those characters kind of rolled in one with Zen, the intergalactic ninja. And this came out in around the later run of the Nintendo, 1993, 1994. And I was able to see Steve at the convention, and he signed this book for me. And it's a fun story, just getting into it a little bit now that I'm rereading it. But it's about nature and the harmony and the ninja zen that the main character brings. The 90s were known for the polybag craze, and the 50s were known for 3D comics. We have a homage here. It's still sealed in the bag, but it includes Spider-Man, the rebooting of issue #1, and a Venom Spider-Man book from 2020. It comes equipped with 3D glasses, and this is the latest 3D comic that I can reference that has come out so far. So it's been a few years, but this is another 3D book. And that wraps up our time-traveling tour of 3D comics, from Batman to Superman, looking at Blackthorne Comics and Eclipse Comics, and what 3D meant. It all stemmed from the cinema and full-scale films of 3D in the early 50s. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you again for watching and for your comments, as I enjoy reading them and learning more about comics and telling where to go next in comic book time traveling. Thank you.